You'll have to excuse the state of my skin. My hormones are testing my willpower not to create holes in my face. 2 videos in 1 week. What is happening? Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Hazel Jane and I paint crap on my face. How is October going for you? Welcome back to another spooky edition of Monsters, Myths and Makeup, which is a little series I have on my channel where I do my makeup inspired by some kind of monster or myth, and then I info dump the lore behind that monster or myth. So last episode we were looking at like Halloween traditions and the legend of Stingy Jack, who was, do you remember the guy who ended up getting Satan stuck in a tree? Now today we are still on theme with Halloween because we are looking at the legend behind a game that is often played at Halloween. Now this game typically involves a bathroom mirror, a candle, and an apparition known as Bloody Mary. Have you ever played Bloody Mary? I don't think I have, but like either way, it's a very fascinating story. So let me shut my trap, go get prepped, and we can jump straight in. So for anyone who is interested in the products that I use, I list everything in the description box down below. Now, who or what is Bloody Mary? So Bloody Mary is a classic scary game often played at Halloween or at sleepovers, and it's based on the legend of this ghost slash spirit slash phantom. The general idea with it is that this ghost spirit is conjured as part of what was originally an act of divination in order to glean some kind of insight into the future. Whilst the original iteration of the game was a bit more fortune teller-esque divination based, it has since developed into the much scarier version that we know and think of nowadays. The general idea of the game is that you repeat her name into a mirror in a darkened room and it may cause her spirit, her apparition, to appear. Now, especially nowadays, the spirit is generally associated with being a malevolent one. Is that malevolent or malevolent? Are that right way around? Malevolent, I think. The bad one. But, as I said, the origins of this game, this ritual, it was a bit more in between. The spirit could appear in more of a friendly aspect. Now, the apparition of Bloody Mary was said to generally only appear when, like, a group was summoning her, which is one of the reasons why it is often played as a sort of party game with a group of people. Now, no one actually knows exactly when this legend started. People have looked into it for ages, but no one has been able to pinpoint an actual time. The only real time frame we have that it was during the 70s that historians actually started trying to trace back the origins of the game. So obviously we can assume that the game was around before the 70s. We just have no idea how much earlier it was. Now, the steps involved in this ritual have changed quite significantly over time. Historically, this divination ritual was quite different to what we think of when we hear Bloody Mary nowadays. It was said that historically, to perform this ritual, a young woman would walk up the stairs backwards in the dark, holding a candle and a handheld mirror. The idea being that they would look into the mirror and see one of two things. They would either see a vision of the face of their future husband, or they would see a skull, which was symbolic of the Grim Reaper, indicating that they would die before they had a chance to marry. Nowadays, the Bloody Mary ritual doesn't really have anything to do with sort of predicting the future, or especially not in relation to marriage and spouses. That's very much an old school divination thing. But nowadays, there are very specific steps that you have to follow for this ritual, but they all change depending on who you ask. But the generally accepted rules of the game involve standing in front of a bathroom mirror with the lights off whilst holding a candle and repeating the name Bloody Mary 3 times. Now, there's a lot of variation on these particular rules, from what you have to say to how many times you have to say it. I found some stories that said you had to say, "I believe in Bloody Mary," or even in some cases, "I killed your baby, Bloody Mary," which is just ugh. And I saw a lot of variation on the number of times that you would say the name as well, and it varied anywhere from 3 to 13, and in some instances it was 100. During my research as well, I genuinely found a WikiHow article of how to summon Bloody Mary in 9 steps, with pictures, but this particular guide also involved like spinning around in a circle 3 times after you said her name. Other stories said you had to have water running from the sink while you were doing it. I think where it's developed into more of like a party game that you use to scare your friends, people have added their own kind of embellishments and flares to it as the years have gone on. Now, what was said to happen after this ritual, again, varies greatly depending on who you ask. But generally speaking, the idea was that once she finished this ritual summoning, the apparition of Bloody Mary may or may not appear. If you were successful and she did appear, you would have to endure her screaming at you, reaching out of the mirror to try and grab you and scratch your eyes out, attempting to strangle you, cursing you, stealing your soul, and in some cases, apparently even drinking your blood. Now, there is some law that states Mary can end up getting trapped in the mirror that you summon her in, and as a result, she will then haunt you forever. With the mirror as well, there are some iterations of it where apparently once you finish the ritual, the mirror itself will start like dripping with blood, as well as various other spooky occurrences like the participant's hair turning white, or in some cases the participant just disappearing without a trace altogether. The law behind that in particular is that it was believed to be Mary trapping you inside the mirror with her. Now, if summoned correctly, the appearance of Mary can, once again, vary greatly depending on who you ask. She can appear as a corpse, as a ghost, or a witch, and she sometimes appears as, like I said, the friendlier type of ghost, but more often than not, she appears as like an evil or demonic spirit. She will often appear covered in blood in some capacity, hence the name Bloody Mary, and there are some instances where she's said to appear holding a baby who is very obviously deceased. Now, the origins of Bloody Mary and the belief that she is or isn't based on a real person is heavily debated. There are a number of historical figures that have been put forward over the years as possible origins for the Bloody Mary myth, the most common of which was Mary I of England, who was actually nicknamed Bloody Mary. So Mary was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, and she was born in 1516, and she went on to become the first ruling queen of England. England had had queens before this, but in the context of they were the king's wife, whereas Mary was the first ruling queen. She had a very tumultuous childhood, as I'm sure you can imagine, with Henry VIII as her father. And just on a surface level alone, her mother and father divorced, her father then remarried to Anne Boleyn, who he then had executed, and he declared Mary as an illegitimate child, and she spent most of her childhood confined to a place called Hatfield House. Then Henry's third wife, Jane Seymour, encouraged the family to sort of reconcile. Henry did eventually then restore Mary to the line of succession for the throne in 1544, under encouragement from his last wife, Catherine Parr. One very quick little side note about Mary's childhood, because it's insane. So before Henry divorced her mother and basically disowned her, Henry actually arranged for Mary to be engaged when she was 2 years old. And it wasn't just like it was in preparation. Like, she was genuinely engaged when she was 2 years old to another 2-year-old. Like, they had a betrothal ceremony, and she was given a diamond ring and everything. The engagement was called off 3 years later, so when Mary was 5, but the year after that, she was set to marry her cousin, who was 22 years old. Like, I know we're talking about different times, and, you know, things were very different back then, especially with regards to royalty, but... Now, in relation to the Bloody Mary nickname, it's believed that there are 2 reasons why she's associated with the legend. The first being the actual reason she was given the nickname in the first place, which was to do with her persecution against the Protestants during her 5-year reign as monarch. Now, Mary was a devout Catholic, and she wanted to set out and try and restore Catholicism to England. And during the time of her reign, Mary would go on to have over 300 Protestants burned at the stake for refusing to convert to Catholicism in what became known as the Marian persecutions. Now, the act of burning someone at the stake was actually a very typical punishment for someone who was accused of heresy, which was considered at the time to be an infection of the body politic that had to be erased so as not to infect and poison society at large, whatever that means. So all over Europe, the punishment for heresy was not only death, but the complete and utter destruction of the heretic's corpse to prevent the use of any of their body parts for relics. Now, because Mary was succeeded by her Protestant half-sister, her legacy became one of this bloodthirsty tyrant, which earned her the nickname of Bloody Mary. A lot of scholars, however, have since debated how accurate this portrayal actually was, and whether or not it was blown out of proportion to try and paint Mary as this evil, villainous Catholic woman during a time ruled by Protestants. I don't quite know where I'm going with this eye look at the moment, and I'm making myself nervous. Okay, I just threw some glitter on there, and whilst it's now starting to border a bit into drag territory, I think it's saved it. Now, the other aspect of Mary that is attributed to the name Bloody Mary, and more so the legend of Bloody Mary, is for a much more literal reason, and that is that throughout her life, Mary really struggled with really heavy and very irregular menstrual cycles, and she struggled to conceive, and it's actually believed that she may have died from either uterine or ovarian cancer. Now, Mary was desperate to produce a Catholic heir to the throne, because otherwise it would go to her half-sister, who was a Protestant. But as I said, she really struggled to conceive. Now, there were 2 occasions on which Mary believed she was pregnant. And to be fair, she had all the symptoms for it. She experienced changes in her body, her menstrual cycle seemed to stop. For anyone looking in, and for Mary herself, it seemed true. It seemed that it had happened. But unfortunately, both pregnancies proved to be false. It's believed that Mary may have actually suffered from a very rare psychological condition where she so thoroughly believed that she was pregnant that her body basically started producing all the symptoms of pregnancy, like some weird kind of placebo effect almost. I can't remember the exact name of the condition, but it's basically where your mind tricks your body into behaving as if it's pregnant, which we all know the mind is very capable of some very powerful things, but to cause the physiological changes involved in pregnancy when there is no pregnancy, purely because of your mindset, is kind of terrifying, if I'm honest. I spent all that time using like white to brighten up my under eye, and then I've just covered it with shadow. Now, these phantom pregnancies, along with the details of Mary's struggles with her menstrual cycles, are often linked to a more literal interpretation of Bloody Mary. And it's also believed to be linked as to why, in some stories, she appears holding a deceased infant. Another historical figure that has been put forward as possibly being linked to the Bloody Mary thing is actually Elizabeth Bathory. Bathory? I still don't know how to pronounce it, I'm very sorry. Now, I mentioned her a little bit in my video looking into Dracula, because she was the Hungarian blood countess from like the 15th century who allegedly killed like 600 young women and girls and supposedly bathed in their blood to retain her youth. I'm not sure how you get from Elizabeth to Mary, but I mean, other than that, I'd say the story lines up. Now, another name that is very commonly associated with the legend of Bloody Mary is someone by the name of Mary Worth. Now, I actually found several stories about who Mary Worth was, but if I remember correctly, there's no recorded evidence of any of these stories being accurate from like census lists or various other records that were kept from the time, but these are the general stories that kind of circulate surrounding this name. So in one case, she was believed to be a woman who attacked and killed slaves who had been trying to escape from the American South using the Underground Railroad. Another was a woman who had taken her own life after her baby had died, and conversely, there was another tale of a woman who had taken her baby's life. And of course, there was the classic folklore origin of a woman who was accused of being a witch and subsequently burned at the stake. Now, the story of the supposed witch is generally a bit more widespread. The other stories that I found seemed to be more sort of like local stories. Again, it all depended on where you went, who you spoke to, and what story you listened to. But the witch Mary was said to live in a small cabin in a forest, known for selling like tinctures and herbal remedies. So naturally, the people of the local village believed that she was a witch, and locals in general were just very, very wary of her for fear that she would curse them or their livestock. Now, eventually, young girls from the village started to go missing, and the villagers did suspect that it was Mary. Now, a few brave villagers went out to Mary to ask her about these missing girls, and Mary denied any knowledge of it, although it was noted that Mary's appearance had changed quite drastically, and she'd gone from this sort of elderly, haggard look to suddenly appearing much more youthful and very feminine. But whilst the villagers had their suspicions, they had no evidence. Then one night, the miller's daughter became captivated by a noise that only she could hear, and she started wandering out towards the forest. Now, her family had happened to be awake at the time, so they were able to follow her, and they roused a load of the other villagers to come with them and see what was going on. They were begging her to stop walking or try and communicate with them in any way, but it was like she was in a trance. She just didn't pay any attention to them. They then began to see like a small light coming from the forest, and as they got closer, they realised that they could see Mary standing in a clearing, holding a wand and pointing it towards the miller's house, and it was the wand that had this glow. Now, obviously, the villagers, who were already suspicious that Mary was a witch, very quickly captured her and set her to be burned at the stake. And then, as she was burning on the stake, she placed a curse on the village and the villagers, in that if any of them ever dared to utter her name into a mirror, her spirit would come back to take her revenge. I did find another origin for Bloody Mary that wasn't specifically linked to the Mary Worth name, but I found it a very interesting story anyway. Now, the tale of this one goes that there was a young girl named Mary who, in the 1800s, lived in a village that was plagued by this, like, mysterious illness, and it went around, and basically anyone who caught this illness was dead within a few days. Now, at that time, the general practice when it was believed that someone had died was that the town's physician would come out and, check for a pulse, or the other practice that they had was holding a mirror under their nose to see if condensation would form to indicate whether they were breathing or not. Now, obviously, in the 1800s, medicinal practices were not exactly the most effective or accurate, so there were many cases where people were thought to have died and then been buried but weren't actually dead. So it became a common practice when someone died that when they were buried, a small hole was made in the top of the coffin and a piece of string was fed through it. This string was then attached to a bell that was hung from like a stick or something, either next to the gravestone or near the house of the person who had died. The idea being that if this person wasn't dead, they would wake up in the coffin, they could pull the string, someone would hear it, and they would be able to stick them back up. Now, Mary did eventually contract this mysterious deadly illness, and it left her bedridden and just slowly dying. They prepared to bury her by placing her in this coffin in her grave, but her parents they wouldn't leave her side, and they stayed with her for days. Like, I think it was almost up to a week that they stayed with her, and it wasn't until their friends had come round and basically said, look, if she hasn't woken up by now, she's not going to wake up, at which point the parents kind of conceded and they went out with these friends. Now, whilst the parents were out, the neighbour came round and started filling in the grave. The string of the bell was all still attached and put in place, and once he had finished burying her, the neighbour paid his respects and then left. Whether he believed the parents had just gone back into the house or what, I don't know. Soon after this, however, Mary did in fact wake up, and once she'd woken up, she pulled on the string that was attached to a bell that no one could hear. Her parents were away, they had left the house, and her neighbour had gone back to his house, so he was too far away. So she pulled and pulled and pulled on this string until eventually she pulled the bell and the stick down, and that was it, she was stuck. At which point she began clawing and scratching at the inside of this coffin, just desperately trying to get out, to the point where her fingers bled, just ultimately until she died. Now, when Mary's parents returned, her father saw the bell that had fallen and realised what happened, so he called for his wife to come and help him dig up their daughter. But unfortunately, it was too late. When they opened the coffin, they found Mary frozen with this petrified look on her face, her hands bent into claws and covered in blood, which had then spilt onto the white dress that she had been buried in. Now, Mary was very obviously dead, but when the physician did his usual checks and held the mirror under her nose, condensation formed. From that, it's believed that her spirit then became attached to that mirror. And it's believed that this is why in some iterations of the ritual, when you summon her, she tries to claw at you, because she's still trying to claw her way out of the mirror in the coffin. I didn't find too many references to that particular story, but it was too fascinating to not include it. I mean, it's a harrowing, awful story, but very morbidly fascinating. Now, there is actually a modern legend in Japan known as, bear with me on the pronunciation, I am going to try, Hanako-san, which really strongly parallels the mythology of Bloody Mary and the ritualistic aspects of summoning them. Now, Hanako-san, which has an alternative name that translates to the Hanako of the toilet, is an urban legend about the spirit of a young girl who haunts the bathroom at a school. And this particular legend dates back to like the 1950s. It's super, super popular within a lot of schools in Japan because it's one of those, you dare your classmates to go into the bathroom and try and summon the spirit. Now, like most myths, and especially urban legends, the details of the origins for this story vary very greatly depending on who you ask. Now, different stories of this legend include things like Hanako-san being a young girl from sort of World War II era who died in an air raid during a game of hide and seek where she'd hidden in the toilets. Another was that she was again a young girl who was murdered by one of her parents or a stranger, again in the bathroom of the toilets. And there are even more stories where it was a young girl who took her own life in the bathroom at school as a result of being bullied. Now, in order to summon this spirit, you are meant to go into the girls' bathroom, usually on the 3rd floor of a school, knock 3 times on the 3rd stall, and ask if Hanako-san is present. If she is, she will respond with some variation of, yes, I am. Now again, depending on what story you read, it is said that after you've done the little summoning ritual, you can see the appearance of like a ghostly or like bloody hand. It's then believed that either the hand or Hanako-san herself will drag you to hell by pulling you through the toilet. Another variation that I find very interesting is that you would be eaten by a 3-headed lizard who claimed that you were invading Hanako-san's privacy. Ghost stories like this and Bloody Mary can be found all over the world in a number of different countries and cultures, and they are often shared among like children on the playground. Like I said, the Bloody Mary especially, it's a game that's played at sleepovers. You dare your friends to try it. It's a game that a lot of people know from their childhood, and over the years it has become sort of like a challenge or a dare to get your friends to take part in this ritual. Okay, I'm really happy with how this is coming along so far. Watch me completely overdo it now and ruin it. But I'm almost at the end of this little story and I very nearly finished this makeup, so let me just go and do the last final touches and then we'll be back. It is so hard to see anything right now. You'll have to forgive me for the state of the wig. I am not a hair or wig stylist by any means, but I'm hoping you can kind of get the vibe that I was going for. Now, going back to the legend of Bloody Mary and the story and the experiences that people have, there is actually an aspect of psychology and science that can go some way to explaining a little bit behind some people's experiences when they do this ritual, because it is a known fact that staring at yourself in a mirror in a dimly lit room for a prolonged period of time can cause you to hallucinate, and basically your features can start to distort and look like they're melting. They'll move and rotate and you start seeing things like strange faces behind you or animal faces as well. There was a psychology researcher who wrote about this phenomena and he referred to it as the strange face illusion, and he believed it was a result of something called dissociative identity effect, which is basically where the brain's facial recognition system just completely misfires. Other possible explanations for it within the realm of science and psychology is that aspects of what people think they see in the mirror could be attributed to what's called the Troxler effect. It's an optical illusion that you will have probably seen at some point, but it affects your visual perception. And it's explained that when you fixate on a set point for even a short period of time, i.e. your own face in a mirror, an unchanging stimulus away from that focus point can look like it starts to fade and then disappear. The examples they usually use for this kind of thing, it's like there's a fixed point in the center and there's like loads of shapes around it, and it's this optical illusion that you stare at the centre and suddenly all the shapes around the edge look like they're disappearing. So if you're standing in front of a mirror in a dimly lit room, staring at your own face for a prolonged period of time, the combination of the hallucinogenic effect of doing that in the first place, combined with things like Troxler's fading, you're gonna see all kinds of crap. I did see one very interesting interpretation of the legend and kind of like the symbolism of it, where it was linked to adolescence and puberty, especially for young girls. And when you look at the details of the ritual, it is often performed in a bathroom. It's to do with the sudden appearance of a woman covered in blood, and it's often played by young girls who are of the kind of age to start getting their menstrual cycle. So some people have interpreted it to be a kind of symbolic ritual or rite of passage to do with a young girl getting her period for the first time, which, like, I get it, and it's kind of a cool interpretation. I like that way of looking at it. I like symbolism in that respect. But generally speaking, obviously, Bloody Mary and the legend of her ghost or spirit is generally just considered to be a fun little game that you play with your friends to scare each other when you're having sleepovers, or something you do at Halloween. I saw lots of stories of people who reminisced about their older siblings getting them to do it when they were a lot younger. There was one where they said their brother had told them they had to do it specifically at 3 o'clock in the morning. So she set an alarm to get up and go and do it. But obviously her brother had woken up with her when the alarm went. So when she went into the bathroom with the candle and did the ritual, he was outside the bathroom and slammed the door shut, which obviously scared the living bejesus out of her. So the Bloody Mary legend, whilst there is still quite a big, not stigma, there is still quite a big fear factor associated with the game. There are a lot of adults nowadays who, you know, they heard about it when they were a kid, but to this day they will refuse to do it. And whether or not it's genuinely because they believe this ghost or spirit will come and haunt them, or whether it's just the connotations of the game and the kind of reputation that it has, it builds up this tension and this atmosphere if you try and do it. As far as I remember, I have never played it. I know some people who have said, you know, nothing happened, but it was quite creepy at the time when they did it. I don't know what is going on with this wig. It's the Medusa problem all over again. I don't know if the hair's moved and looks worse because I can't see anything, but I'm hoping it hasn't. But so goes the legend of Bloody Mary. That was a fun one. I really enjoyed that. Let me know what you guys think. If you've ever played Bloody Mary, please tell me. I am dying to know people's experiences with it. Or if you know someone else who's played it, let me know in the comments down below, because I would love to hear your stories about it. What do you think of the origins itself? Like, who do you think it's based on, or do you think it is based on anyone? Or is it just a folklore story? Is it not necessarily based on any one person? Let me know what you think of the look as well. Other than the wig that I'm not entirely sure on, the look itself, I'm really happy with. I really enjoyed putting this together, and I feel like it's a nice mix of, like, kind of spooky, but still kind of glam. I mean, if it wasn't immediately obvious, the idea is that this is the broken mirror and the blood from the bleeding Mary. Let me know what other monsters or myths or stories you want me to cover in the comments down below. Thank you very much for stopping by. I appreciate all of you. I hope you have a fabulous next week for October, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.